Why this is also important is because just before Christmas there was an announcement from the province of Ontario that as of April 2016, Ontario will be open by default. And what that means is the data that the government has is going to be available as open unless it has specific requirements around privacy and security. This is a really big deal for us in Ontario and Canada, and it will help drive the open data movement as we go forward. So with that said, it's really exciting to have Kevin here. Kevin heads up the Open Data Exchange initiative, and he's going to tell you a little bit more about that, so I won't go into it. But Kevin is with Communitech and also has the VP of Strategic Initiatives for Communitech, leading cluster building initiatives, especially around open data and big data and the Internet of Things, all three key trends, technology and industry trends that are really driving a lot of innovation today. Previously, he was a founding member of the Canadian Digital Media Network, and Venture Labs is very proud to be a hub with the CDMN, which is a federal center of excellence for the commercialization of research in digital media. And their programs are aimed at helping Canadian companies take their digital media services and products to market more quickly and to be visible on the global stage. So all that to say, we were delighted to have Kevin here today, and without further ado, Kevin, if you'd like to come and talk about the ODX.
First, I've been instructed to wire myself up, so. Push button. All good? Oh, I can even hear myself. Wonderful. Well, thank you, Karen, for that introduction. It's great to be here. I'm a little ashamed to say it's probably been a couple of years since I was last here. I can't remember why I was here, but it was a good time. Maybe that's the indicators. I can't remember, so it must have been a good time. But yeah, Venture Lab's been a great supporter of CDMN back in my CDMN days. And lots of good things going on here and lots of good things going on across the country. And one of the good things I want to talk about today, that I see as a good thing that's happening, is this thing called open data. And there we go. So I'm going to talk about the Open Data Exchange. It's a relatively new initiative that's come about. Loosely stated, Open Data Exchange is around commercialization of open data. And I'll get into a little bit about what that means as I go through. I want to set the context a little bit here. And it really is, where I'm going with the, sort of my first comments is really around the culture of Canadians, or the culture of Canada. I don't think I need to tell anybody in the room that we're a very resource-driven country. Certainly right from the early stages we call it kill it, mill it, and drill it. I didn't coin that phrase, but I did borrow it. But the point of the matter being is that very resource intensive, and what we'd often do is we'd we'd extract the resource, we'd send it to somebody else, and then they'd sell us back to us at a higher price, and essentially give up the largest part of the value chain of that. And so this is sort of a deep-rooted culture that we've got going on in Canada. But of course, the world is changing. It's changing to digital. My premise is that digital is a disruptor. And I see data as a key part of that disruption. And it's disrupting absolutely every single industry. It has the potential to. I think it's just a matter of time in terms of it's more of a if, or it's more of a when as opposed to an if. And the thing about it is that I believe that we as a nation are in a great position to take leadership when it comes to open data. But it's going to take a little bit of a culture change in order to do that, because we are used to doing things a significantly different way. Who've maybe before I go any further, who's heard of open data before? Oh, excellent. So I don't need to go much into what is open data. I can actually skip a couple slides completely. But the idea is that I think data is becoming a currency, is already a currency. People are going to be trading in data in the not so distant future. And of course, there's a wide spectrum of data out there. And it's everything from, government data, which is predominantly the largest source of open data that we have right now. But it can be, your own personal data. It can be organizational data. And of course, the spectrum is in terms of how open or how closed is that. So at one end of the spectrum, I think you have a lot of companies sitting on a lot of data that they consider their intellectual property, extremely closed and, for the most part, very unwilling to share that data with anyone. Then we slip to the other end of the spectrum where it's more open, and this is the, like the York region in terms of the number of open data portals that are becoming available out there. The focus is on, here's data, I'm opening it up, it's for you to consume, enjoy. And of course, there's a wide, vast spectrum in between all of that. So again, I don't really need to go into the open data part of things because everybody here has heard of it. The key important part of this, in terms of the definition of open, though, is it seems that it's adopted the framework that it's free, it's easily accessible, there's really no license to do it, to access it, and you can basically use it for whatever you want, which is all fine and good. But part of the reason that we called ourselves the Open Data Exchange is the focus on the exchange part of it. And this is going back to data as a currency. So we've got the proprietary data, which is extremely closed. We have open data, which is, by definition, extremely open. But in order to create that marketplace around data, which we're moving towards, then there's got to be that value exchange. And I think the truest, best treatment of data as a currency is going to involve not necessarily just access to free data, but it's going to be creating those value propositions and those relationships that results in data being exchanged between parties. And what I'm saying is that there may be a fee for that. But that doesn't mean, that's throwing open data to the wind or that open data doesn't have a place in that. I think it's what we're doing. This is an evolving model around data as a whole, and open data is a big enabler of all of that. And there's one of the things that I've found out, or quite pleasantly surprised by actually, since we've launched Open Data Exchange in May last year, is the amount of open data activity that's going on around Canada already. So this is this map is essentially drawn from the Government of Canada's website on different communities or organizations or governments that are actively participating in open data some way, somehow. And so, again, that came as a little bit of a surprise to me, but a pleasant surprise. So there's a lot of activity going on out there. It's just that I'm finding that it's really for essentially maybe one purpose. And the whole open data movement came about as a result of open government and transparency. So it's government saying, look, we've got nothing to hide. Here's a PDF of our budget online. You can go have a look at it, see everything's wonderful, which is a great way, and it's a great initiative to start. But when it's about transparency, and it's only about transparency, and that's the key driver, then when it comes to the things that I would like us to focus on, and that is using open data as a resource for commercialization, then they can be at odds with one another. So if you go to the York region side, and I don't mean to pick on York, but I mean, when in Rome, do as the Romans do sort of thing. If they put all of their information online in PDF format, that's great for the human to consume, but when it comes to being machine readable and doing things at scale, it's not exactly the best way to consume that data, nor is it the best way to support commercialization activities around data. So the good news about the open data movement as it is up till now is it's resulted in a flood and a barrage of information and data becoming available. And that's the good news. So it's opening up a very rich resource. But the thing to keep in mind, though, is that Canada isn't in this alone. So even though that map I showed earlier is a good indicator that there are clusters of regions that are really focusing on making data available, the rest of the world is too. So part of the thing I think we need to focus on, as in terms of the way we look and use data, and open data in particular, is that this is a race. And there's a sense of urgency to this because going back to the fact that data is a currency, we're going to trade in data. Open data is a good resource to start with. This is going to be a global race. And again, I believe that Canada is in as good a position as any country in order to really, truly take advantage of this phenomena. But we need to do, going back to the idea of changing the culture of how we treat data, then we got to move beyond just the discussion around transparency and just the discussion around open government. And the benefit is you both open data for the good, or for civic good, or for transparency can coexist in the world where open data is also being consumed for commercialization purposes. And so the whole premise of what we're looking at is here's this great source of data called open data. It's a fantastic resource, but to what end? It's not just about making data available. The premise has to be, and the conversation has to revolve around, is why do we want to tap into this open data? So with the Open Data Exchange focused on commercialization, we're also saying we need the market to drive the opportunities. It has to be a market pull kind of initiative. And I think we're in the middle of sort of a transition, or we're along the spectrum of open data adoption, where we started with this vast resource, and we made it available to the masses, and there's hackathons popping up all over the place. And it involved, we've got Code 2015, we've got Code 2016 coming up, and we have a number of hackathons. I know we've seen a number of hackathons in our own region. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I'm saying that it's kind of like, here's a technology looking for a problem to solve. And I think that the opportunity in those kinds of initiatives and those kinds of activities is maybe you're going to find that needle in the haystack, or that diamond in the rough, and somebody's going to create something fantastic out of that. But I'd say it's more like buying a lottery ticket than it is about creating a substantial industry around using data. And so our focus is working with the private sector and saying, what problems do you have that open data can be used as a tool to help solve, as opposed to, here's data, figure out a way to use it. And so when we start talking about the private sector, because I think in terms of where the conversation hasn't gone in terms of discussions around open data, where we would love to see it go, is let's loop the private sector into the discussions. And it's not necessarily just about creating good for the private sector. I've had the opportunity to talk about Open Data Exchange at a number of predominantly government conferences over the last few months. And when I get up and I talk about using open data for commercialization purposes, you can kind of tell the angst in the room starting to rise. It's kind of like, how dare you use a publicly funded resource, for commercial benefit? It should be for civic good and for civic good only. And my retort to that is, well, you're assuming then that civic good and commercialization and sort of private sector involvement are mutually exclusive, and that's absolutely not the case. In fact, I believe the best possible working model where both benefit involves both of those groups working together harmoniously. And I'm going to get into a little bit later on, and I want to talk a little bit about the concept of a smart city and how open data fits into a smart city concept. So I'll just hold on to that for now. But in terms of how can the private sector use this? Well, they're great at innovating because their survival depends on it. And they're great at finding solutions to problems because business models rely on it. Now, they don't always solve the right problems, but that's neither here nor there. I think we could always do better in that. But the point of the matter is they operate differently. And as a result of that, they know, and they're looking at ways by which they can use open data to either enhance their own capabilities, to improve their own knowledge of their own processes, or to create net new products and services that are fueled by open data. So they're obviously, I think, a good partner to bring into the mix. And and we've heard all of these wonderful stories of how open data is going to be a $3 trillion opportunity and market opportunity. And I'd say that I'd lump Internet of Things and big data and everything into the same bucket. It's been hyped for so long, and nobody's going to argue with McKinsey when they say it's a $3 trillion opportunity. And time will tell whether that's the case or not. But again, this is, I think this dates back to, 2013. And see, these are the stats that they came up with. So you can imagine this is probably close to 3 years old, these stats. And we've got 1 million plus data sets being opened by governments worldwide, and that's just by governments. So you can imagine where that is now. And so I believe I'll be cautiously optimistic that there's something to be said about the size and the magnitude of this opportunity. But we can also measure opportunity and value in other ways. And that's what I like about this slide that they produced, is it's, that $3 trillion could result in, open data being used to reduce congestion on highways so carbon emissions get lower, or public transit, or things of that sort, where we can actually improve lifestyles, we can improve the civic good, and as a result in net benefits to the planet. Doesn't all necessarily have to be about dollars and cents in revenue. But again, that's the power of data, is it enables a variety of outcomes. So in terms of open data in itself, I mentioned the idea of, a public budget is wonderful and great in PDF format if all you want to do is look at it. But if you really want to operate on it and do something with it, there's certain things that you need to be considering. So machine readable is a big part of that. And again, I don't think that's any sort of revelation to the folks here. The driven by demand, again, is a key premise about the way that we want to approach this. Accessible and of course standardized. And I guess it's always dangerous when I'm given a platform, is my own philosophy enters into it, and sometimes people like it, some people violently disagree with it. But the way I look at it is there's probably no better way to solve or to look at standardization problems than, and security issues around data, than to actually apply it to a problem and then work your way back and bring these things in as tools in order to solve those problems. Whereas if we're trying to work and put our effort into standardizing every data set under one umbrella for everyone's use, my inkling is that we're not going to help anybody to the extent where they can actually create good applications at scale. So it really has to be a market-driven exercise, and it really has to be focused on the intent of the problem that's being solved and the solution that's being created to solve that problem. So the bigger picture around this, and I mentioned these things, Internet of Things and big data and open data, and I'd lump them all together. They represent fantastic opportunity, and that slide is probably $50 trillion if you lump all those opportunities together. And my feeling is that the danger is if we treat any one of those in isolation, then we're really missing the true opportunity. So we can't think of open data without thinking how big data might play into that. We can't we can't think about open data if we don't figure out how the Internet of Things might fit into that. Because I think the truest and richest opportunities and applications may involve the sprinkling of each of these or a part of these. So the focus being is maybe it's not about the open data, maybe it's just about the data as a whole. And I think it was soon after we launched, I was thinking, I think we might have made a mistake by putting open in front of data exchange, because I'm thinking it's really about being a data exchange, of which open data is one element of that. But we got funded as Open Data Exchange, so we're good to go with that. So the premise being is it really is about the data. It's not about this data, well, as cool a guy as he was if you're a Star Trek fan. It truly is about data as a whole, and treating data as a currency and looking at the opportunities and looking at open data, Internet of Things, et cetera, as being enablers of all that. And where this is eventually going to go, and especially relevant for open data, and I think the discussions are already being had out there, is, okay, there was this big flurry to make all of these data sets available. One of these days, somebody within government, somebody within municipality, somebody within the city is going to say, but hold on, it's like I can't make all of this available for free for no given reason. I've only got a limited budget. And there's only going to be more data and limited budgets, so there's going to be that question is, all right, so how do I figure out what data I should be making available or what data I shouldn't be making available? How do I ascribe value to open data? How am I going to figure out the return of an investment? And again, this is a very private sector oriented sort of approach to that. But in the end, I think data can be seen as an infinite resource in many ways, but of course it takes finite resources in order to make that data available. So we have to think about that, about how we're going to actually ascribe value to the use of open data. So then I'll get into a little bit now about Open Data Exchange and where we came about and what our mandate is. So it's the Open Data Exchange is a public-private partnership. We came about as a result of a group of 5 organizations coming together, and we put together a concept paper around the notion of creating an organization that enables and accelerates the commercialization of open data for all the reasons that I've already spoken about. And we submitted that to both Industry Canada and Treasury Board a couple of years ago. Of course, at the time, Tony Clement was president of Treasury Board, and open data was one of his pet projects. And he saw the concept, he liked it. We had some funding put into the federal budget in 2014, and we kicked off in May of 2015. And the whole premise of Open Data Exchange, and again, we're probably going to get sick of that C word, commercialization, but we are focused on how can we use data from a commercialization perspective. And so essentially what we're doing is we're helping to build a supply chain for open data with the application at the end of it and the application in the market driving the creation of those applications. So it's a very simplistic supply chain, if you will. I think it's fairly fundamental in terms of where these elements come from. But the notion of what we're trying to do is let's build the ecosystem around open data. So it's not just about the private sector, even though I talk about the private sector a lot. The private sector, this won't work without the data sets, which are predominantly coming from the public sector. And of course, we need universities and academia in order to advance the state of the art of capabilities, and even if it's purely analysis and visualization. And we need government. I mean, kicking and screaming, if that's the case may be, we need to bring them along also from a policy perspective. So we are taking very much of an ecosystem approach in order to try and enable the open data ecosystem in Canada. So even though this was, the Open Data Exchange was formed by partners within southwestern Ontario, this is a national initiative. And so we're looking to build the ecosystem for Canada and truly help Canada to take advantage of open data. So been around since May 2015. We've talked to a lot of companies, a lot of organizations. We've been over to visit the UK and their Open Data Institute, which is arguably probably one of the most advanced open data initiatives in the world. And we've just asked the question, have you heard of open data? What are you doing with open data? Is open data on your roadmap? Do you care? Do you want me to leave? All these sorts of things. Good news is nobody said I want you to outright leave, which gives me hope. But there's a few things that we've learned along the way. And it's really that the whole notion of data as a disruptor. And we've seen it happen in a couple of industries already. You've seen the Ubers, you've seen the Airbnbs of the world, you've seen the Netflix of the world. Well, it's really been because of digital, and it's always been because of data. And the home base for Open Data Exchange is in Communitech in Kitchener. And in Kitchener, one of the we have these things, or Communitech has these things called innovation outposts, and these are essentially little skunkwork labs that large enterprises set up within the Communitech hub. They hire teams, and essentially they're using it as a way to accelerate their innovation. And even though they won't come out and outright say this, I think the primary reason that they're there is that they're motivated by fear. They're motivated by the fear of the fact that in the case of TDs of the world, while it's not RBC or CIBC that I have to be worried about, it's that little startup that's back in velocity that's working on something that could completely disrupt my business model, much like Bitcoin has the potential to do. Or it's the Canadian Tires of the world that are looking and saying retail is being turned on its end, and Canadian Tire is still very much focuses on and counts on in-store presence. So they've come there to try to figure out how they balance their online presence with their in-store presence. And we've got, I think there's probably 8 or 10 of them now. The latest one to announce that they're there is General Motors. But the fascinating part about it all is that each and every one of them hire teams, and not one of the team members that they hire for those innovation outposts have ever worked a day in their life for the parent company, nor in many cases have they ever worked a day in the life of that vertical market sector. And it's what they're saying is that we need to innovate in a different way, and what we need to do is we need to pull from a different community to bring that, to crowdsource that innovation, if you will. And having the opportunity to speak to every one of them about, well, where does data fit into this? Where does open data? What about IoT? Like, does this matter to any of you? Do you care? And I was pleased to find out that in every case, it did matter to them. Even open data. I was surprised that they even know what open data was or how they might use it. But the spectrum varied. So there were some that said, we know what open data is, we know we need to use it, and this is our game plan for doing it, all the way down to, well, I know I should care about open data, but you know what, I'm really not even utilizing my own data very well, let alone having the ability to layer more data on top of that. So they're looking for help, and they're looking for incentive and innovation in order to be able to take care of that. But the point of the matter is disruption is at the key of it. Digital and data is a big part of it. So data is a new currency. I don't think I'm going to go into that anymore. I think I've probably bored you to death on that one. The notion of things we always hear from companies is I need more talent, and after that I need more talent, and then if you can help me find talent, that would be great. So it's really truly about finding the right talent for what they need to do. And so the whole notion of the data analysts, the business analysts, those that can decipher this field of data and figure out why it should be relevant to these companies is becoming more and more of a sort of a need that's out there. And on the more disparaging front, though, is I only see the academic institutions slowly reacting to this need. So I'd say the demand for the people, the individuals, these kind of skills is far outweighing the supply. And universities and colleges are trying, and they're getting there slowly but surely. But I think there's a little bit of a gap there. So these are kinds of things that we're wondering as Open Data Exchange, what can we do in order to help that? And I mentioned that there's companies are at various stages along the adoption life cycle, if you will, around data. But again, none have ever said that, no, it doesn't matter to me at all, at least the ones that we've had the chance to talk with. And the other thing is that the whole notion of open data isn't just for startups. SMEs care, the large enterprise care, and it's not just about the tech enterprise that care, the non-tech enterprise care. I would say maybe more than the tech do. Some ways I wonder if, in some ways, the tech companies are in a bit sort of a notion of complacency and figuring they have it all figured out, whereas the non-techs are the first to put up their hands and say, we're struggling, we need help us to get to where we need to be. But again, that will play out as time goes on. So in terms of all of this and what we've learned, and recognizing that Open Data Exchange, first and foremost, is a national entity. It's an intermediary that's out there to help companies to better utilize data to their advantages. And what are we planning to do? So there's a number of programs and services that we're building out right now and we're looking to offer. A lot of it is focused on mentorship. So it's providing perhaps an SME with a startup or a startup with access to a data analyst that they either couldn't afford or would have no idea where to find them if they did. So very much built on that mentorship model, which I know happens quite a bit here at Venture Lab and lots of other innovation centers across the country. We're also looking to, in the spirit of data, to build an online platform and community. So the exchange part of Open Data Exchange, if we were to look 5 years into the future, it's this place, if you want any kind of data, whatever it may be, and you don't, the place that we want you to think of first is to come look for it is perhaps the Open Data Exchange. So it's not unlike the TSX where you come, you buy, you sell, you trade, you look for something that's of value, you look to exchange value. And because I think data has the potential to be that kind of valuable resource, then why don't we set up that community and that platform in order to do that? So we're just at the very early stage of doing that, but that's a big part of what we want to do. Informing and supporting the supply chain. So a lot of open data is coming from the government. Their checkbox gets checked in some cases when they make the data sets available, and it's, we've done our job. But again, being that link between what the private sector needs in terms of how the data needs to be formatted or how it needs to be accessed and everything of that sort, we want to be that intermediary that makes sure that the conversation continues between the users of the data and those that are supplying the data. And hopefully that we can instill some change so that we can make that much more of a fluid connection between them. And it's and the other thing, part of what we want to do is, I guess essentially what I'm doing right now is just to get the word out there around open data and what's going on, and look at the opportunity and to spread the word that we as an organization, we want to be out there to help in order to focus on the commercialization of open data. And we, in fact, I think I've got a slide coming up here. So one of the things that we're doing in order to help is, I'll give you a few examples of the sort of things that we're doing. So I mentioned that there's lots of companies out there that have an interest in data but have no idea where to start in terms of a strategy or an execution plan. So we heard that loud and clear. So we're working with, we're putting together a pilot. We're working with Deloitte. And it's a workshop, a half-day workshop in insight-driven organizations. So it's essentially it's a half day, but the first 2 hours is about what is an insight-driven organization, what are the tools and what are the tactics of being an insight-driven organization, of which data is at the core. The second half of the day is bring your challenge to the table and let's get a start at applying some of these techniques to helping to solve that challenge of that problem. And our hope here is part of a growing capability of being that connector to help develop that skill and that talent to develop and deploy data strategies, is that we take you far enough along to introduce you to the concept where you realize it's relevant, and then we like to tap into the partnerships and the existing things that are already going on out there in order to take your learning deeper and deeper. So Open Data Exchange isn't going to be a university or a college anytime soon. We're going to be that connector that says, that ties, the need to the capability that's hopefully already existing in the community to do those sorts of things and go deeper and to build that knowledge. So this is just a pilot. We're going to run it for 15 to 20 people. It goes on, I think it's this Friday or Thursday. I think it's Thursday. I think I got the date there wrong. But already in terms of, we decided what we're going to do is go out and specifically recruit the demographic that we thought would be most interested in this. So we were targeting hard the SMEs, and we're going to sprinkle in a few startups and sprinkle in a few enterprise. And even out of that, what we've found is, well, if there's free food, then startups are in. Just kidding. I had startups myself, so I was there looking for the free food. But the SMEs are less interested, and really where we're getting the most demand is really from the enterprise side of things, which we really didn't expect. But again, this is part of sort of the learning in all this. Some other things that we're doing, and this will look familiar to you, Yuri, is who have heard of the Open Data 500 initiative? Okay, a couple people. So this was an initiative that started out of the US. GovLab is the name of the group within New York University, I believe. And this is a snapshot from their website, and that's an interactive graphic that you see there. So if you actually visit this on the website, what you'll find is as you hover your mouse over that graphic, what it does is it's giving you a visual depiction of various private sector sectors that are tapping into open data sources and drawing connections between to what data sets that they're drawing upon. So it's awfully difficult to read, but you got healthcare and you got transportation and things of that sort. And what the Open Data 500 was about was a research program where researchers went out and found companies that were utilizing open data and tried to categorize as to how they were using that data. And so it serves as a bit of inspiration. It's not only awareness and knowledge of private sector companies that are using the data and what data that they're using, but you can actually drill down right to the companies and what they're doing to figure out what the business model is that they're deploying in order to tap into that open data. So it serves as a bit of a source of inspiration as to how others they're using open data and how they're using it. So we're at the very early stages of doing the Open Data 150 for Canada. And similar sort of approach is let's dig in and figure out what companies are already involved in the open data space and how are they using the data, what data sets are they drawing upon. And this is all good knowledge that, that we can feed back. And so if we know that the biggest source of, the most highly sought out data set is GIS data for whatever, well then that's informative to those that are making the GIS data sets available. So it gives them some indication of what the demand is, even from a supply side. So we thought this was a good thing to do, and we're just, again, at the very early stages of that. But that's one of the projects that we're taking on. And this one, we're looking at running a pilot called, it's a challenge series around, again, focusing on helping cities, in this case it's a city, to better innovate with their own data. And the whole notion of the ODX challenge is working with the city, and we've got one city picked out, and they're fairly proactive in it. And the idea is, instead of sponsoring a hackathon where the city opens up half a dozen or a dozen of their data sets and you let a bunch of enterprising young entrepreneurs go crazy on it, we want to do it slightly differently. We're going to say, okay, there's some legwork that the city has to do other than just making data available. Figure out some challenges that you're facing in the city within your own organization that you want to try and solve, or you want to try to make better, or you want to improve. And let's offer those up as the problem set that we put out there in combination with your data to engage the private sector to actually work on solutions to those specific problems. And it's going to be less of a hackathon base, so it's not a 48-hour hackathon, but instead it's a challenge that will roll out over the course of 2 to 3 months. And so it's not just limited then to those crazy 20-some-year-olds that are willing to give up a weekend and eat bad food and not sleep for, to come up with some solutions around data. It also has the opportunity to tap into the SME population, because it will really be a stage gate process where we'll slowly whittle down either proposed solutions or prototypes of solutions to problems, right to the point where we may narrow it down to 2 or 3 that are viable solutions to the problems that were posed. And I think the benefit of that approach is that instead of a prize at the end of it for those that attend, sort of the winner of the hackathon being a cash prize that they can use for whatever, the prize here is essentially a reference customer. So it's somebody where they've actually solved the problem for a reference customer, and then now this becomes creates a potential for this to be an exportable product that they can add to their product line. Because the notion around doing it around cities is that chances are, if City A is having a challenge around trash collection or around public health or whatever the case may be, other cities are going to be having the same problems. It might be slightly different or different scale, but still a problem. So then you're essentially opening up hopefully a decent addressable market for the winners of this. So we're just going to try this out, see how it works, but we also see this as an opportunity for, it doesn't have to stop at cities. I think one of the trends that we're seeing more and more so are the large enterprises that I've been talking about realize that they've got, they potentially are sitting on data that could be of value to others and could be helped either, themselves innovate, or somebody else will use their data to create something net new and wonderful out of it. And so this model equally applies to helping large enterprises to unlock their own data for building innovation around their data as well. And again, we're seeing that shift where it's like, thou shalt never see my data because it's my intellectual property, to the point of being, well, let's consider that. Maybe I'll open up my data for a period of time to a very specific group of individuals and see what happens and comes out of that. So these are the kinds of things that we're looking to move forward and see if they can provide some value that way. So in terms of, the value that we see ourselves as potentially, providing, it's working along every element of that supply chain. So it's working with the data providers to inform them and help them connect with those users or potential users of their data, to informing them about standards and how those users like to consume that data. But it's also about building the ecosystem. It's not just about the community, but it's also bringing the tools, the stakeholders, the enablers to the table, and really just being that connector, bringing people together and the right organizations together based on the needs that they're seeing. We are looking to, instead of taking a shotgun approach and being everything to everyone, our initial thoughts is let's focus on a couple target vertical markets and see what we can do, if we can go deep and help out in those specific markets. And then ultimately it's just about, how can we help companies to tap into this resource and essentially start building applications at scale. So one of the last things I wanted to talk about with this, this is probably, it's less about me, well, I guess it's a little bit about me giving my philosophy, but I'd love the feedback on it. Because one of the areas where I think there's great potential for not just open data, but data as a whole, is again around the notion of smart cities. Because the idea with cities, I mean, they are, in many cases, they are large producers of the data in the first place. But they're also, in many cases, they're quite often the biggest consumers of their own data. So they're using their own data to provide insight and knowledge around their own operations, ultimately to trying to figure out how can we become more efficient, or how can we provide more value to our citizens, et cetera, et cetera. But it doesn't have to stop at open data, because we can think of applications now. Let's think about Internet of Things for a second. So open data will give you so much knowledge about, sort of the vital signs of your city. But then you're probably looking at, if you really want to, provide even greater value as part of a smart cities concept, maybe there's more real-time data collection that you want to integrate into that, which is exactly where the Internet of Things ties into. And so then this goes back to the idea of, the real power is in data. It's not just open data, it's not Internet of Things. But I think taking a smart cities approach, what's unique about it is those that are making data available, at least from an open data perspective, are also the customer. So they have a lot to gain and a lot a lot of value that they can extract from that. And so a philosophy or taking an approach where you look at smart cities and integrate these all things together with a focus on building applications that make cities smarter, and looping in the private sector as being at least one element of that innovation chain. Because if you, there are many enterprising smart cities out there already. And in some cases, they're already building teams in order to innovate internally, which is good. But it's good to get you to that first level, that first release of that innovation. But where's that continued innovation going to come from? Cities just really aren't staffed, and they aren't really ideally suited to do that, whereas the private sector is exactly set up to do that, because that's where their survival comes from. So I'm seeing more and more of that kind of activity going on around the world. We see cities being instrumented this way or another way. And again, I think a part of the biggest value is, and it's maybe one of the sectors or vertical markets or approaches that we're going to take as Open Data Exchange, as well as some other data-enabled stuff that we're doing as part of Communitech as well, is to really focus on that smart city, because it really is the combination of the ideal customer, a bunch of data sets, and again, it's solving real problems, and the benefit of it is that everybody can benefit from those things. So that's just more or less of a thought than anything else. So with that, I've probably talked way longer than I should have. But the idea is hopefully leave you with the notion that there's value in data. There's good opportunity in data. Canada is at a position where I think it can become a world leader in this space. There's no reason why we can't. There is a sense of urgency around it. I really don't want to see us as a country wait to see what the US does or what the UK does or whoever, and then do something similar. I just as soon see us as being the market leaders. And I think in many cases, the things that Canada has been accused of in the past as to why we tend to sometimes be more followers than leaders, we can actually use to our advantage here in terms of our ability to create great technologies and apply great technologies and solve problems. So with that, I'm going to stop. I thank you again for the opportunity and happy to take any questions or comments.